In my last video, we talked all about the nature of autoimmunity in myalgic encephalomyelitis, also known as chronic fatigue syndrome, and of course the closely related long COVID. We talked about the nature of that autoimmunity, the way in which it's like a kind of disruptive signal that interrupts core bodily physiological processes. And we talked about all the different kinds of symptoms that autoimmunity can create, such as problems with your heart pumping, problems with the blood vessels opening up to allow the blood to get into the muscles or brain, problems with your endocrine glands and the creation of hormones, and finally problems with dryness and the ways in which this autoimmunity can cause someone to have less tear production, less saliva production, less sweat production, etc. In this video, I'm just going to talk about how you can actually test to see if you have these particular autoimmune problems. I have done this test myself, and I will also be sharing with you my test results. But first, if you are new to this channel, my name is Patrick Usher and I am an ME-CFS patient. And this is a place where I aim to present accessible explanations of the research into ME-CFS and long COVID so that you can be more empowered into understanding these conditions better. It's also a place where I aim to share the various treatment strategies that I have tried in order to improve my condition. So if that sounds good to you, please do like and subscribe. Now in this video, I won't be going over the ins and outs of autoimmunity in ME-CFS and long COVID. You can watch my previous video to get all the details on that. But the one thing I will just remind you of is that the autoimmunity in these conditions is comprised of functional autoantibodies. These are little autoantibodies that are not attacking the body, they're not destroying the body, but they are blocking core physiological processes, and because they're blocking those processes, there develops a pathological state. So there are specific autoantibodies associated with ME-CFS, but there are also specific autoantibodies associated with POTS, or postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. So some patients may have more of one kind, and some may have more of the other, or some may have a good mixture of both, given that these conditions are so closely related. And so each of these autoantibodies will be responsible for a different cluster of symptoms. Now, so how do you test for these autoantibodies? How do you know if you have them? Now, if you're in America and you have a consultant who is a kind of top dog in these sorts of conditions, or who is pretty familiar with them, they will probably be able to run a lab for you there. However, if you're outside of America, the situation is a bit more complicated. Really, to the best of my knowledge anyway, there's only one lab where you can get these autoantibodies tested, and it is in Germany. It's called Celltrend, and it's in a small town called Luckenwalde. Now, so do you have to get on a plane and fly over to Germany and take the small train up to Luckenwalde? No, you don't. You can get these bloods drawn anywhere. So you could be in Iceland, or you could be in Italy, or you could be wherever. You can get these bloods drawn. Certain instructions need to be followed around the drawing and storing of the bloods, and then you can arrange a FedEx to deliver the bloods to the lab. So on the Celltrend website, you will find various instructions for how to actually go about this. So here's the Celltrend website right now, and you can see that they have a section for POTS, chronic fatigue syndrome /ME, small fiber neuropathy, and long COVID. And then you can click on information for patients, and then you have information on the various tests available. So you can test just for ME-CFS autoantibodies. There's 4 different autoantibodies, which I talked all about in that video I mentioned earlier, the beta-1 autoantibodies, the beta-2 autoantibodies, muscarinic 3 and muscarinic 4 autoantibodies. And that test costs €108, around $132. And then you can run instead a test for POTS and ME-CFS autoantibodies. So you're getting all of them, in which case you're adding in angiotensin 2 receptor, endothelin receptor A, muscarinic 1 and 2 and 5, and alpha 1 and alpha 2 autoantibodies. And in this case, the test is €467 or $575. So there is an information document for sample collection. So I'll just show you that. And so here we have the patient instructions. So they have what needs to be done for the person collecting the blood. I won't read through that. You can see it there yourself, and it's something that a lab technician would be more familiar with understanding. And then they have the instructions for shipping and how you need to go about that in terms of using FedEx and the address to send it to, etc. So basically that's what you'd have to do. You'd have to just go to a lab, have it all cleared with them in advance. It's going to be collected, give them the instructions in advance, make sure they know what they're doing, arrange a FedEx for the same time pretty much, or maybe just slightly after, and then get the bloods to the lab in Germany, at which point they will analyze them and then send you an invoice. So this is a very helpful thing to do, to know where you stand with autoimmunity in these kinds of illnesses, because not everyone has this autoimmunity, or some people just have one or two markers, or some people have all of them and have them in very significant quantities. And we know from a German paper by Professor Carmen Scheibenbogen that the more of these autoantibodies you have, the iller you are. So there's a direct correlation between symptom severity and the number of autoantibodies you have, which makes sense because the more of them you have, the more of a disruptive signal there is interfering with your body's basic way of functioning. Now, I said that I'd give you my results for this test. I got them done. I didn't get them done via FedEx. I was actually in Germany at the time. I was in Bayreuth, a small city in Bavaria, where I was undergoing HELP apheresis treatment in a dialysis center. And I have a whole video about my experience with that blood washing procedure. It improved me between 15 to 20%, getting out all the microclots from my blood. So I was very happy with that. But they were also able just to draw blood to send off to the lab because it's in Germany and they do this kind of thing for their long COVID or ME-CFS patients often enough. So I got that done and I got the test for all of the autoantibodies to see exactly where I stood. So here were my results. Now you can see that I came back positive for 5 autoantibodies and borderline for 1. So what was interesting here is I came back positive for all of the ME-CFS autoantibodies and only one of the POTS ones, and then I was borderline for another POTS one. But generally, looks like my autoimmune profile is more what you'd see with ME-CFS. So we'll just go through the ones I was positive for. So for example, you'll see anti-beta-1, adrenergic receptor antibodies, I came back positive at 17.4. And the cutoff point is 15. And in this case, those autoantibodies are affecting the heart function. So they're reducing the capacity of the heart to pump so effectively. I came back positive more significantly for the beta-2 receptors. Beta-2 receptors are responsible for the perfusion of blood into the muscles, as well as into the brain. So normally when someone wants to exercise, they got to get blood perfusing into their muscles so that the muscles, require that in order to keep up with the demand. If you have these autoantibodies, you're not going to be able to do that perfusion very well. And so your muscles are going to give up and you're going to experience post-exertional malaise because they reach their anaerobic threshold, the point at which they create lactic acid too quickly. So that ties in very well with ME-CFS. And also, of course, brain fog, because if you have this lack of blood perfusion into the brain, you're going to have problems with memory and cognitive function. So I came back positive for those. I came back positive for the anti-muscarinic 3 autoantibodies, which can explain a few symptoms for me. So they're particularly, one of the things that I've suffered with ever since I became ill is dryness. So the fact is that the muscarinic 3 receptors normally control moisture creation in the body, so the production of mucus, sweat, tears, etc. And those are all things that I have trouble with. So when you have the antibodies against muscarinic 3 receptors, that's blocking the production of moisture in the body. So that makes sense for my situation. And then finally, I came back positive. Well, not finally, actually. I came back positive for the muscarinic 4 receptors as well. So we don't know so much about them, but they do. But if you have these autoantibodies, they will be blocking M4 receptors in the brain, which are responsible for dopamine creation, so the reward neurotransmitter. So you're going to start developing problems with willpower, motivation, maybe addictive tendencies as well. So these kinds of things will start to develop. And then the alpha-1 autoantibodies going back up are responsible for the constriction of the larger blood vessels that go back up to the heart. So don't get confused between them and the beta-2 receptors, which are responsible for vasodilation, the opening of blood vessels in the more peripheral muscle areas. The alpha-1 receptors are more responsible for the return of blood flow in the bigger blood vessels up to the heart, and they should be vasoconstricting, for example, when you stand up, to allow successful return of blood up to the heart. If you have these autoantibodies, then you are going to have problems with that vasoconstriction, and your heart won't get enough blood when you stand. So we can see how a lot of these, autoantibodies could contribute to the exercise intolerance that is so characteristic of ME-CFS. And regarding the anti-ETAR antibodies, I have to admit I don't know what they do, but I did come back borderline for them as well. So that's it. That's how to test for these autoantibodies. If you have done this test, please do share your results down below and what you think of how those autoantibodies might play into your symptoms. Or maybe you haven't done the test, but there's some light bulbs going off at the moment about whether or not these autoantibodies could be playing into your condition. In upcoming videos, I'm going to be talking more about autoimmunity in these sorts of illnesses. I'm going to be talking about a treatment that's available right now in Germany, if you happen to have a fair bit of spare cash, called immunoabsorption. I'm going to talk about an upcoming treatment also being developed in Germany called Berlin Cures. And I'm going to talk about the autoantibodies that exist in POTS as well and what they do. Because, I've researched the ones that affect me personally, but I haven't researched the ones that may affect other people who have a more POTS profile, so I'll be talking about them, and I've got a few other videos planned on this topic as well. So I hope you enjoyed this. Please leave your comments and questions down below. If you want to find out more about me and the various books I've written a book on POTS. I've also written a book on thirst in ME-CFS, POTS and long COVID, and why it's probably been mistakenly misdiagnosed as a mental illness. Information about those books down below, as well as about my website and consultation service.